It began with a message that never came. For months, Emily Turner had been rebuilding her life after a turbulent early adulthood. She had survived more than most people knew: unstable housing, a difficult breakup, and years of trying to stay one step ahead of the wrong influences. But by the spring of that year, things finally seemed to be settling. She had a steady job, a circle of supportive friends, and the quiet hope that her future might actually look different from her past. Then she met Brian Carson. He was soft-spoken, attentive, and quick to make her feel understood. What Emily didn't know, what almost no one knew, was the shadow he carried behind that easy smile: a long criminal record, a talent for avoiding consequences, and a jealous streak that surfaced when he felt threatened. Still, Emily believed in giving people chances. And for a while, life with Brian felt calm. Stable. Almost safe. But as summer approached, small signs of trouble began to appear. Emily missed her niece's birthday, something she would never do. She cancelled dinner plans with her mother 3 times in a row. Her best friend, Lily, noticed a shift in Emily's voice during their calls: quieter, distant, like she was choosing each word carefully. One day Emily stopped answering entirely. At first, everyone assumed she was busy or overwhelmed. Weeks later, worry became fear. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her social media remained silent. And Brian gave different explanations to different people: she'd gone to visit friends, she needed space, she was angry at her family, she'd run away. None of the stories matched. By September, Emily's family contacted authorities. Detectives searched local shelters, hospitals, and trails she liked to walk. Nothing. No witness sightings, no financial activity, not even a digital trace. Emily had simply vanished. The investigation soon revealed that Brian wasn't living alone. A woman named Kara Wells had moved into the house just weeks after Emily disappeared. She insisted she knew nothing about what happened. She barely looked up when detectives questioned her, answering in short, rehearsed phrases. Something felt off, but there was no evidence yet to push further. The case stalled. Leads faded. Months passed in silence. Then, in the heart of winter, a couple contacted the sheriff's office with an unusual complaint. They said someone had left a large freezer at their rental home, claiming it was filled with personal belongings and asking them to hold on to it. The couple grew uneasy when the key wouldn't turn the lock, and when the person who left it stopped returning messages. Deputies arrived, forced open the lid, and stepped back instantly. Inside the freezer lay dismembered human remains. A small tattoo on the shoulder, faded but recognizable, confirmed what Emily's family feared most. Their daughter had been found. The discovery of the freezer changed everything. For months, Emily Turner's disappearance had been a painful uncertainty, an open wound for her family, a puzzle with missing pieces for investigators. But once deputies identified the remains, the case shifted from a search to a criminal investigation. Detectives who had once sifted through digital records and missing person reports were now examining a crime scene that revealed the unimaginable. The freezer had been left behind at a small rental home where a couple, Trevor and Denise Miller, were preparing to move out. They said the appliance had been dropped off by an acquaintance named Josh Harper, who claimed Brian Carson had asked him to store it temporarily. Josh insisted it contained clothing and personal items that needed a safe place. It seemed harmless, until he abruptly stopped answering calls. When deputies pried open the lid, the cold vapor rising from inside carried a weight the room could barely hold. Carefully sealed bags lay stacked like a puzzle no one wanted to solve. The presence of the tattoo on one shoulder removed all doubt: Emily had not left town voluntarily. She had never walked away. Someone had taken her life, dismembered her, and tried to scatter the truth. Detective Laura Jensen, who had been on the case since the first missing person report, felt the shift instantly. The inconsistencies surrounding Brian, the timeline gaps, the uneasy feeling she had during early interviews, all of it sharpened into clarity. She requested a warrant for Brian Carson's home the same day. The search revealed more than anyone expected. Inside the house, officers found signs Emily had lived there shortly before her disappearance: clothes still in drawers, a half-finished journal on the bedside table. But other discoveries were far more troubling. Behind the garage, investigators uncovered a scorched patch of earth. Someone had built large fires there, fires hot enough to burn materials that didn't belong in a casual backyard gathering. Neighbors confirmed that Brian and Kara had hosted several bonfires in the weeks after Emily vanished. The flames had been unusually bright, and the smoke had smelled strange, chemical, almost metallic. At the time no one questioned it. Now, the significance was unmistakable. Meanwhile, Josh Harper, who had delivered the freezer, was brought in for questioning. He quickly distanced himself, claiming he had no idea what the freezer contained. He said Brian had called him in a panic, insisting he needed help getting rid of something and begging him to move the appliance. Josh admitted he agreed without asking questions, believing it was some kind of stolen property. Detectives didn't believe him entirely, but they noted the fear in his voice. Whatever he knew, it wasn't everything, and it wasn't enough to satisfy investigators. The breakthrough came when they re-interviewed Kara Wells, now the only person still living in Brian's house. This time she looked less composed. Her hands trembled as she tried to answer basic questions. Her timeline shifted every time detectives asked her to clarify details. And when they mentioned the freezer, Kara's face drained of color. Something had happened in that house. Something she had seen, or done. But before detectives could confront her fully, a new piece of evidence emerged in the most unexpected way. A neighbor reported seeing something on the night Emily was last heard from. A heated argument. A loud crash. A woman's voice screaming. And then, silence. The neighbor's testimony reshaped the investigation. Suddenly, the timeline that once felt hazy became clearer, sharper, more dangerous. According to the witness, the argument took place just after midnight. Emily's voice was unmistakable, panicked, pleading. The man's voice, assumed to be Brian's, grew louder until it became a single crashing sound that cut everything off. It matched the period when Emily stopped responding to messages. Detective Laura Jensen returned to Brian Carson's home with forensic teams. This time, they searched slowly, methodically. Every room, every drawer, every inch of flooring was examined. Though the house appeared clean, almost unnaturally so, evidence has a way of clinging to the truth. Hidden behind the washing machine, investigators found what looked like fragments of fabric, cut, scorched, and still faintly stained. In the kitchen, a utility knife was tucked behind a drawer. The blade had been scrubbed, but luminol revealed faint traces on the handle. And in the garage, they found a large rubber mat rolled tightly against the wall, bearing marks consistent with dragging. Kara Wells, who sat in the living room while officers worked around her, grew increasingly agitated. She asked repeatedly if she could call someone. She changed her story about the night Emily disappeared 3 times in an hour. Finally, when detectives invited her to come down to the station for a voluntary statement, she didn't object. She knew her silence could not last. At the station, Kara's composure crumbled. Her voice shook, her hair clung to her forehead, and she could barely meet Detective Jensen's eyes. What began as a denial quickly dissolved under pressure, not because detectives intimidated her, but because the truth was heavier than the lie she'd been carrying. She admitted she'd been living with Brian for only a few days when Emily vanished. She claimed Brian told her Emily had taken off after a fight, and that she had believed him until strange things started happening: the sudden bonfires, the freezer that appeared in the garage, and Brian's insistence that she avoid certain rooms. But when pressed further, when did you first see the freezer? Did you ever open it? Did Brian talk about Emily afterward? Kara grew silent. She stared at the table as though the answers lived somewhere in the scratched metal surface. Finally, she whispered, "I helped him move it." It was the first direct admission linking her to the cover-up. Confronted with this, she revealed more. On the night of the long argument, she had been in the back room. She heard shouting, then a sudden thud. She insisted she didn't see what happened, but when she entered the hallway, the house felt different, cold, tense, wrong. Brian stood in the kitchen shaking, repeating that Emily had attacked him, that it got out of hand, that she was gone. Kara said she panicked. She did not call for help. She did not leave. Instead, she followed Brian's instructions. She stayed quiet. When the freezer arrived days later, she didn't question it. Detectives noted her statements, but they knew she wasn't telling everything. There were pauses in her story, moments where she swallowed her words, where she refused to describe certain details. And though she portrayed herself as a frightened bystander, her timeline placed her squarely inside the house during key moments. Meanwhile, investigators continued gathering evidence outside. At the fire pit behind the garage, soil samples revealed bone fragments too damaged for immediate identification. They were sent for analysis. Detective Jensen felt the case tightening. The house that had once seemed ordinary now looked like a graveyard of secrets. But they needed one more piece, something to connect all three people involved. That connection came from an unexpected source, a phone belonging to Josh Harper, found abandoned behind a gas station. And inside it was a message that changed everything. Josh Harper's abandoned phone was discovered by a store clerk who turned it in after noticing it had been left behind for more than a day. Detectives retrieved it, hoping it might offer something, anything, to clarify his role. At first, the device yielded nothing unusual: casual texts, old photos, work messages, a handful of calls from Brian Carson. Then they reached a folder that had been deleted but not fully overwritten. Inside was a single video clip. It was shaky, recorded in low light, and just a few seconds long. But even those seconds struck like a hammer. Josh's camera faced Brian's garage. The bonfire pit glowed behind him, flames high and bright. Off-screen, Brian's voice muttered something unintelligible before Josh whispered, "Man, this is messed up, you said it was handled." The audio ended abruptly, and the screen cut to black. The video was dated 2 days after Emily Turner was last heard from. With this new evidence, detectives brought Josh in again. This time, he didn't swagger or act confused. His shoulders slumped the moment he saw the printout of the timestamp. He knew the truth had finally caught up. At first his confession came in fragments, half-sentences, muttered regrets, but soon the full story emerged. According to Josh, Brian had called him the morning after the argument, asking for help with a situation he couldn't fix alone. When Josh arrived, Brian looked frantic. He kept pacing and saying Emily lost control, that it happened fast, that he didn't mean it. Josh claimed he didn't see anything at first, only noticed the freezer after Brian insisted it had to be moved later. Josh admitted he suspected the worst but refused to look inside. He helped load the freezer onto his truck, drove it to Trevor and Denise Miller's rental home, and dropped it off with a made-up story about broken furniture. "I didn't ask questions because I didn't want the answers," he said. Detectives knew he was minimizing his role, but the video confirmed he had been present for at least part of the cover-up. It also confirmed that Brian had not panicked only in the moment, he had continued burning and hiding evidence days later. Meanwhile, forensic teams completed analysis of the bone fragments from the fire pit. They were consistent with human remains but too damaged to identify immediately. Still, the discovery reinforced the timeline forming around Brian, Kara, and Josh. With the investigation accelerating, officers located Brian Carson at a friend's apartment and brought him into custody. He gave the same story he had repeated for months, that Emily had stormed out after a heated fight and never returned. But when detectives confronted him with the freezer, the tattoo, the video, and Kara's statements, his confidence cracked. He leaned back in the chair, jaw flexing, eyes darting toward the closed door as though calculating escape routes. Yet even then, he refused to take responsibility. Instead, he shifted blame between Kara and Josh, claiming they had gone too far with something he never agreed to. But the evidence told a different story. Blood traces found beneath fresh paint in the hallway matched Emily. The knife discovered in the kitchen drawer contained microscopic fibers identical to fabric found with the remains. The rubber mat in the garage bore both drag marks and diluted blood patterns. And Brian's fingerprints were on every item. Detective Laura Jensen watched him closely as she laid out the facts. Brian's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing. For the first time, he stopped speaking entirely. Silence settled over the room, a silence that confirmed more than any confession could. The case had begun with a disappearance. Now it was unmistakably a homicide. But before detectives could move to charge all three individuals, another witness came forward, someone who claimed to have seen Brian and Kara on a late-night drive, hauling a large container toward a remote property the week Emily vanished. And what they found at that property would finally reveal just how far the group had gone to hide the truth. The new witness was a farmer named David Langley, a quiet man who rarely visited town but kept careful watch over the rural roads near his property. When detectives arrived at his home, he greeted them with a worn notebook in hand. He explained that on the week Emily Turner vanished, he had stepped outside late one evening to check on a generator. The night was warm, and the sky had an orange glow from distant fires. As he approached the fence line, he saw headlights sweeping across the dirt road, a small SUV he recognized as Brian Carson's. Behind it, a pickup truck followed closely. Both vehicles slowed near a remote clearing on the edge of David's land. That detail caught detectives' attention immediately. The clearing bordered an old gravel pit, rarely visited now except by hunters or the occasional off-road vehicle. David continued, he saw the SUV parked first. Minutes later, he noticed two figures, he believed they were Brian and Kara, heaving a large rectangular container out of the back. He had assumed it was construction waste or scrap metal. But after learning about the freezer, he realized the timing aligned too closely to ignore. Detectives secured a warrant and headed straight to the gravel pit. The air felt different there, still, heavy, as though the ground itself had absorbed secrets. Forensic teams spread out, carefully probing the soil, examining disturbed patches of earth, and scanning for burn marks or discarded items. It didn't take long to find something. Near the tree line, they discovered a partially buried bag containing charred debris, scraps of fabric, metal hardware, and small bone fragments. A few yards away lay melted plastic, fused into the soil by extreme heat, and traces of accelerant. Someone had attempted to destroy evidence here, just as they had behind Brian's house. The most telling find was a shovel with worn wooden handles, its blade darkened as if used in both digging and fire. The fingerprints had been burned away, but the tool carried microscopic soil traces that matched samples taken from Brian's yard. Piece by piece, investigators mapped out the group's movements. Brian had acted first, after the argument, after the fatal moment inside the house. Kara, caught in shock or fear, had stayed and helped clean the scene. Josh, whether unwilling or too frightened to resist, joined them later to move the freezer and dispose of additional remains. The clearing near the gravel pit had been their second attempt to hide what they'd done. Back at the station, detectives presented the new evidence to each suspect. Kara's reaction was immediate, her breath hitched, her eyes filled with tears, and she whispered that she didn't want to remember that night anymore. After a long pause, she admitted she had been with Brian at the pit, though she insisted she never touched anything. She said Brian had acted with frantic urgency, pacing and muttering while she waited in the passenger seat, terrified of what would happen if she left him alone. Josh's response was different. He stared at the photos silently before finally mumbling, "I thought they already burned everything behind the house." It was the first time he acknowledged prior knowledge of the bonfires. When detectives pressed him, he admitted he had helped transport items to the pit but claimed he believed they were cleaning up a crime scene, not covering one up. His words carried fear, regret, and a clear attempt to shift blame. Brian refused to speak at all. He sat rigid, eyes focused on a fixed point on the table, his silence colder than denial. Each new piece of evidence tightened the case around him, and he seemed to know it. Even without a confession, the physical findings, witness statements, and timelines formed a nearly unbreakable chain. For the first time since Emily's disappearance, detectives could see the end of the investigation forming. The motives, the sequence of events, and the roles each person played were finally aligning. But justice still required one final step, bringing all three into court, securing charges, and ensuring no one could escape the consequences of what they had done. As the case moved toward prosecution, Emily's family prepared for the heartbreak of hearing the details, but also for the first real chance at closure. The courtroom was full on the morning the charges were announced. Reporters gathered along one wall, attorneys shuffled case files, and families of both the victim and the accused filled the benches with a mix of dread and expectation. For the first time, everything that had happened in the shadows would be spoken aloud. Prosecutors charged Brian Carson with taking Emily Turner's life and orchestrating the efforts to hide what had happened. Kara Wells and Josh Harper faced charges for helping him conceal the crime, each accused of participating in the disposal of evidence. Although the details were devastating, the facts were now undeniable. Emily had spent her final moments in the home she believed was safe, and those she trusted had betrayed her in ways too deep to fully understand. As the case moved forward, each defendant made a choice. They could face a trial and risk even harsher outcomes, or accept plea agreements that reflected the seriousness of their involvement. One by one, they agreed to the latter. Josh was the first to cooperate fully. His statement detailed the role he played in moving the freezer and assisting with the disposal at the gravel pit. He admitted he feared Brian but acknowledged he still had the choice to walk away and didn't. His plea secured a lengthy sentence, one that held him accountable without overshadowing the central responsibility. Kara followed. Her account of the night Emily died was fragmented but consistent with the evidence, the argument, the sudden silence, Brian's panic, and her own fear-driven decisions. She expressed remorse, though nothing could make her actions, or her inaction, disappear. Her sentence reflected both her participation and her cooperation, ensuring she would remain in custody for many years. Brian was last. Even facing overwhelming evidence, he refused to accept fault in Emily's death. But with witness statements, forensic results, and his own movements meticulously documented, he had nowhere left to turn. His plea deal offered no leniency, only certainty. He received a sentence long enough to ensure he would never again walk free. With the legal process nearing completion, detectives continued to search for the remaining portions of Emily's remains, hoping to give her family the chance to lay her fully to rest. The efforts were difficult, the terrain unforgiving, but the determination was unwavering. Emily's family, though shattered by the details, gathered strength from one another. They held candlelit vigils, organized memorials, and ultimately created an online tribute where friends and strangers could share memories, photos, and messages of support. The page filled quickly, stories of her kindness, her resilience, her warmth. People who had known Emily for years wrote about her laughter, people who had only heard her story wrote about how deeply they were moved by her life. Slowly, the community that once searched for Emily came together to honor her instead. Detective Laura Jensen visited Emily's mother on the anniversary of the discovery. She expected grief, and it was there, but so was something else. A quiet strength, a resolve shaped by sorrow but not defined by it. Emily's mother said she wanted people to remember her daughter not for what was done to her, but for how brightly she lived before her path crossed with someone who sought to dim that light. In the end, the investigation closed, the sentences were finalized, and the three responsible were behind bars. The town returned to its routines, though forever changed. And Emily's story, painful, tragic, but filled with the love of those who refused to let her be forgotten, lived on. Her family carried her memory forward the only way they knew how, by refusing to let the darkness of her final chapter overshadow the hope she had always carried for the future.